Trapped by my husband in prison for 2 years for his mistress, watch how I got my revenge and turned them into homeless vagrants on the very day of my release. The cell walls were damp, smelling of a mixture of old concrete, dried sweat, and rotted hope. For Isabella, however, that wall was a giant calendar. With the tip of her rough, slightly broken thumbnail, she etched a tiny vertical line near the leg of her iron cot. The line was almost invisible if you didn't look closely, but to Isabella, it was a small mark of victory. 729 days. Tomorrow would be day 730, the day of her release. Isabella took a deep breath, filling her lungs with the stale air of the Rockland Women's Correctional Facility. She sat cross-legged on the thin mattress that had been her home for the last 2 years. Before this, she slept in a king-sized bed with Egyptian cotton sheets in a lavish penthouse on the Upper East Side of Manhattan. Before this, she was the wife of Jackson Monroe, a rising star in real estate development. Now, she was just inmate number 304. The memory returned like an unstoppable tide. The flashes of reporters' cameras in the courthouse, the condescending gaze of the judge. And there, on the witness stand, was Jackson, sitting in an impeccably rolled-up white shirt, his face tilted in a perfectly feigned sorrow. "I loved my wife, Your Honor." Jackson's voice trembled then. "It was an Oscar-worthy performance, but I cannot condone her actions. She pushed Sophia out of jealousy. She killed our unborn child." Then there was Sophia, Jackson's personal assistant and also his mistress. Sophia, sitting in a wheelchair. Her face was pale, devoid of makeup, deliberately designed to look pitiful as she clutched her flat stomach. Crocodile tears streamed down her cheeks as she pointed a trembling finger at Isabella. Mrs. Monroe screamed at me, calling me a whore. Then she pushed me down the stairs. I felt the blood. A lie. It was all a lie. That day, Isabella did go to Jackson's office to demand an explanation for the affair she had discovered, but she never touched Sophia. It was Sophia who hysterically backed away and slipped, or perhaps threw herself, down the emergency stairwell that was covered by only one security camera. The footage from that camera was strangely corrupted during the crucial minutes, leaving only the image of an enraged Isabella at the top of the stairs. A 2-year sentence, aggravated assault resulting in the death of a fetus. When the judge's gavel struck, Isabella's world collapsed. She saw Jackson embrace Sophia, consoling that viper. But in that embrace, Isabella caught a split second where Jackson looked at her, not with guilt, but with a cold, calculating gaze. The look of someone who had just eliminated the sole obstacle to a multi-million-dollar inheritance. Isabella, daydreaming again. A gruff voice snapped her out of her trance. It was Carla, her cellmate, a middle-aged woman imprisoned for a pyramid scheme. Isabella turned with a neutral expression. In these 2 years, she had learned to shut off her emotions. Tears were a luxury she couldn't afford in this place. "Just counting, Carla," Isabella replied quietly. "You're getting out tomorrow. If I were you, I'd be thanking God so hard I'd get a bump on my forehead." Carla laughed as she folded her prison uniform. "But you're weird, Bella. You're too calm. Like someone going to the grocery store, not someone getting out of hell." Isabella managed a faint smile, a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Because the real hell isn't in here, Carla. The real hell is out there waiting for me." Isabella stood up, smoothing her blanket. "And this time, I'll be the one holding the torch." 10 a.m. Visiting hours. The sound of the correctional officer's heavy footsteps echoed down the cell block. Normally, this was the most anticipated hour for the inmates, the hope of receiving a package from a relative or just seeing their children's faces. But for Isabella, this hour was a test of patience. "Isabella Vance, you have a visitor," the hefty female officer yelled from the other side of the bars. Isabella didn't move from her position, reading a book in the corner of the cell. She didn't even lift her head. "Who?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. "Who do you think?" "Your faithful husband and his young lady," the officer mocked. Despite her toughness, the woman felt a certain sympathy for Isabella. The whole prison knew how diligent Jackson and Sophia were with their visits. To an outsider, It looked like an act of responsibility and repentance, but the officers who often saw their interactions knew something was off. "Tell them I'm sick. Or dead." "Whatever," Isabella answered coldly, turning a page in her book. "Bella," Carla whispered. "It's the last month. You're out tomorrow. Why not see them one last time? Maybe they'll bring you some money." Isabella slammed the book shut. "I don't need their money, Carla. Besides, they don't come to give, they come to take." The officer sighed. "Mrs. Vance, Mr. Monroe says it's urgent. He says it's about your late parents' estate assets. They're going to be seized by creditors if you don't sign today. He's brought a notary." Isabella laughed, a dry, sharp sound. "Tell the Honorable Mr. Monroe," Isabella said, looking directly at the officer, "that my hands are crippled. I haven't been able to hold a pen in 2 years because I've been too busy washing inmates' laundry. If my father's assets are seized, so be it. Let it all sink." The officer shook her head, giving up. "You're unbelievably stubborn. Fine. I'll tell him you refuse to see them again." When the officer left, Isabella leaned her back against the cold wall. Her heart was pounding, not from fear, but from contained rage. Every month, for 24 months, Jackson and Sophia had come. At first, they came with sweetness, bringing good food, pretending to want to reconcile. Jackson claimed he was forced to have her imprisoned by public pressure and Sophia's family. But Isabella knew that a week after she entered prison, Jackson tried to liquidate a trust fund in her father's name worth $3 million. The bank refused because it needed Isabella's signature as the sole heir. From that moment on, their visits became psychological torture. Jackson would plead, then threaten. Sophia would cry, then mock. They needed that signature. Jackson's business empire, which looked magnificent, was actually rotten. Its primary capital had always come from infusions of funds from Isabella's father. Without Isabella, Jackson was just the captain of a sinking ship. "Just you wait," Isabella whispered to the empty air. "You won't get my signature. You'll get me." In the air-conditioned visiting room, Jackson Monroe loosened his tie abruptly. Cold sweat beaded on his temples. "She refused again?" Jackson asked, almost shouting, when the officer returned alone. The officer nodded indifferently. "She says her hands are crippled, sir. She can't sign." "That lunatic!" Sophia, sitting next to Jackson, slammed her Hermes bag on the table. "She's doing it on purpose. She knows the company audit starts tomorrow. If we can't liquidate her father's trust fund today to cover the hole in the balance sheet, we're finished." Jackson massaged the bridge of his throbbing nose. His usually handsome face now looked older than his 35 years. The last 2 years had been a logistical nightmare for him. He thought getting rid of Isabella would make things easier. Isabella was a meek, submissive homemaker, or so he believed. He thought throwing her in prison would break her spirit, that she would sign anything in exchange for an early release or better conditions, but the Isabella in prison had become a rock. She refused sentence reductions, refused privileges, and worst of all, refused to cede power over the assets of her father, Richard Vance. Although Jackson already controlled the operations of his father-in-law's company without legal ownership of the shares, he couldn't mortgage the vital assets to get new loans. "Calm down, Sophia. Don't shout in here," Jackson hissed. "Calm down? You're telling me to calm down?" Sophia glared at him, her beautiful face distorted by panic. "The developers for the Skyline Tower project are already demanding the third payment. If we don't pay by next week, the project stalls, and the media will smell blood. And remember, Jackson, she gets out tomorrow." Those words hung in the air like poison. She gets out tomorrow. "So what if she gets out?" Jackson tried to sound confident, though his heart faltered. "She's just an ex-con. Who's going to believe her? Her reputation is destroyed. The baby killer label will follow her forever. We'll pick her up tomorrow. We'll take her home, lock her up. We'll pump her full of sedatives until she signs." "Are you sure?" Sophia looked at him doubtfully. "She's been silent for 2 years, Jackson. Her silence is scary. She's never made a scene, never begged. She just refused." "She has no one, Sophia. Her father's dead, her fortune is locked, her high society friends have abandoned her. She'll walk out of here a homeless woman if we don't take her in," Jackson said, trying to convince himself. Jackson stood up, adjusting his jacket. Let's go home. Let's prepare the script for tomorrow. Call the reporters. We'll create the narrative that we're a compassionate family welcoming back the wayward wife. That way, if she tries anything, the public will think she's an ungrateful wretch. Sophia huffed but followed Jackson. As they walked to the waiting black Mercedes, they didn't realize their seemingly perfect plan was hanging by a very thin, very taut thread, about to snap. Night fell on the prison, bringing a bone-chilling cold. In the small library, rarely visited by other inmates, Isabella sat across from an older woman with short white hair. It was Eleanor Shaw, a famous former lawyer imprisoned 5 years ago, used as a scapegoat in a high-profile political corruption case. Eleanor was Isabella's unofficial mentor inside. "Ready for tomorrow, kid?" Eleanor asked. Her voice was raspy but full of authority. Isabella nodded. "Mentally, I'm ready, Eleanor. But what about the documents?" Eleanor smiled mysteriously, reached into her pocket, and pulled out a small, smuggled USB drive. "My protégé, Matthew, has everything secured on the outside," Eleanor whispered. "He's brilliant, just like I was at his age. He's traced the flow of funds from Jackson's company." Jackson was careless. He used a shell corporation in the Cayman Islands to launder project money, but he listed his own mother as the director. An amateur. Isabella's eyes gleamed coldly. "And Sophia's medical proof?" "Safe," Eleanor replied. "Matthew managed to get close to the nurse who treated Sophia. Turns out the nurse kept a copy of the original, undestroyed medical file. Sophia suffered a miscarriage 2 days before the stairwell incident due to an overdose of illegal diet pills. She was already bleeding when she left home that day." Isabella clenched her fists under the table. The truth was painful, but also liberating. She had never killed anyone. The guilt that had tormented her in the first few months vanished without a trace, replaced by the embers of a fiercely burning vengeance. "Thank you, Eleanor. I don't know how I can ever repay you," Isabella's voice trembled. Eleanor patted her hand. "Repay me by winning, Isabella. Win for all of us who have been silenced by arrogant men and a corrupt system. When you walk out of here, you won't be the naive Isabella anymore. You will be the CEO of your own life." Eleanor leaned in. "Remember our strategy. Don't attack directly. Let them feel superior first. Let Jackson believe he still has control. When he lets his guard down, when he feels secure on his throne, that's when you pull the rug out from under him. First step, asset freeze," Isabella murmured, repeating the plan they had mapped out for months. "Exactly," Eleanor nodded. "Based on your father's original will, the one you left in a safe deposit box at a different bank that Jackson, luckily, didn't know about, you have absolute veto power. The moment you walk out and activate your status with the board, every single penny leaving the company accounts will need your approval." Isabella pictured Jackson's face when his credit card was declined. A faint smile returned to her lips. "One more thing," Eleanor added, her face serious. "Be careful. Jackson is cunning, but Sophia is reckless. Desperate people do desperate things." "I already died once 2 years ago, Eleanor," Isabella replied calmly. "They can't kill someone who's already dead." Her last night, Isabella couldn't sleep. She spent it packing her few belongings, a few books, a toothbrush, a change of clothes she wore when she came in, and a small, crumpled photo of her father. She distributed the rest of her soap, shampoo, and some food among her cellmates. An emotional atmosphere enveloped cell number 12. "Don't forget about us, huh, Bella?" Carla said with teary eyes. "I won't," Isabella promised. "I'll be back, not as an inmate, but as someone who will help with your case, Carla." At dawn, Isabella stood before the small, cracked mirror above the sink. She studied her reflection. Her hair, once long and manicured, was now cut to shoulder length and somewhat coarse. Her skin was no longer as soft. There was a hardness to her features. Her eyes, once soft and full of love, were now dark and deep like the ocean on a stormy night. She was no longer the sweet Mrs. Monroe. She was no longer Richard Vance's spoiled little girl. Prison had stripped her of all her naivety and weakness, leaving behind a core of indestructible steel. She touched her chest. Her heart beat steadily, without fear. There was only a sharp focus. Outside these walls, Jackson and Sophia were probably sleeping soundly on a plush mattress bought with her father's money, or maybe they were nervously thinking about the audit. They didn't know a storm was heading their way. They believed the Isabella who would walk out tomorrow would be a broken, shamed, and poor woman. They thought they were coming to pick up a wounded sheep. How wrong they were. The cell door would open in a few hours. Isabella put on her old white shirt, the only decent piece of clothing she had. The shirt was now a bit loose on her thinner frame. She buttoned it up to the collar as if putting on armor. Isabella sat on the edge of the bed, waiting for the sound of the key turning in the lock. She whispered a promise to herself, a promise that would fuel her every step from that moment on. Jackson, Sophia, enjoy your fancy breakfast this morning, because it will be the last decent meal you'll be able to swallow in peace. The metallic clang of the lock echoed. The cell door swung open. The light from the hallway spilled in. The game had begun. The morning sun shone brightly on the prison's outer courtyard, as if trying to burn away the sins locked behind the concrete walls. However, the sun's heat was outmatched by the heat from the camera flashes. Jackson Monroe waited by the exit gate, dressed in a perfectly tailored dark blue Armani suit. Beside him, Sophia, in a discreet ivory-white knee-length dress, her hair pulled back in an elegant bun, held a bouquet of white roses. They looked like a couple from the cover of a lifestyle magazine, if you ignored the fact they were waiting for Jackson's ex-wife to be released from prison. "Do there have to be so many reporters?" Sophia hissed under her breath, maintaining a stiff smile for the cameras. "There have to be," Jackson replied without looking at her, giving a brief wave to the crowd of reporters. "We need to control the narrative from the first second she steps out. The headline has to be, 'Devoted husband welcomes home repentant wife, not ex-con seeks revenge.'" Jackson looked at his watch, worth tens of thousands of dollars. His heart beat with anxiety. He hadn't slept all night thinking about the audit starting today. He needed Isabella's signature before lunch, or the bank would start freezing his operating credit lines. "The gate is opening," one of the photographers shouted. The groan of the old iron gate sliding open broke the tension, all lenses focused on the dark opening. Slowly, a figure emerged. Isabella Vance. She didn't walk with her head down, as shamed inmates often do upon release. She walked tall. Her steps were firm and measured. She wore a simple, slightly oversized white shirt and faded jeans, the same clothes she wore when she was arrested 2 years ago. Her short, shoulder-length hair framed a sharp, pale face, unadorned by makeup or jewelry. But something was different. Her eyes. Isabella's eyes scanned the crowd of journalists and settled on Jackson and Sophia. There was no longing, no sadness, not even explosive anger. Her gaze was empty, yet sharp as the barrel of a rifle about to fire. Jackson swallowed hard. He took a step forward, extending his arms with a practiced, emotional expression he had rehearsed in the mirror. "Isabella, honey, finally," Jackson said loudly for the microphones to catch. "Welcome back. We're here for you." Sophia stepped forward behind Jackson, offering the flowers with a trembling hand. "Sister-in-law, we've prepared your room at home. Let's start over, okay?" The cameras flashed frantically, capturing the moment of reconciliation. Isabella stopped 2 steps away from them. She looked at the white roses as if they were a dead rat. Then she looked at Jackson. The corner of her mouth lifted slightly, forming a twisted, chilling smile. She said nothing. She simply stepped to the side, walking right past Jackson as if he were a lamppost in her path. "Isabella," Jackson hissed, his voice turning sharp as he realized she was ignoring him. He grabbed her arm. "Don't make a scene. Get in the car now." The grip was strong, painful, but Isabella didn't flinch. She looked down at Jackson's hand on her arm, and then up at his eyes. "Let go of me," Isabella said quietly. Her voice was hoarse from disuse, but its coldness chilled Jackson to the bone. "Or I will scream in front of all these cameras that you are hurting me." Startled, Jackson instinctively released her arm. Isabella resumed her walk, leaving Jackson and Sophia standing there with ridiculous expressions and empty hands amidst a crowd of reporters who were beginning to whisper in confusion. "Where is she going?" "She has no one," Sophia said, panicking. Her voice began to rise, shattering the elegant image she had built. Isabella continued walking towards the main road. Jackson tried to follow, but his steps were halted by the soft roar of an approaching engine. A gleaming black Rolls-Royce Phantom pushed its way through the pack of journalists. The car was ostentatiously luxurious, a stark contrast to the dusty street in front of the prison. Its license plate was not ordinary, it indicated that its owner had access and power. The car stopped right in front of Isabella. A uniformed chauffeur quickly got out to open the rear door for her. But it wasn't the chauffeur that made Jackson's jaw drop. It was the figure of a young man in an impeccable suit who emerged from the passenger side and bowed respectfully to Isabella. Matthew Hayes, the young Harvard-educated lawyer famous for winning impossible cases against giant corporations. Jackson had tried to hire Matthew for his legal team last year but had been flatly rejected. What was Matthew doing here? For Isabella. "Good morning, Mrs. Vance." Matthew greeted her with a clear, respectful voice. "Per Eleanor's instructions, everything is ready." Isabella gave a brief nod. "Let's go, Matthew." Before getting into the luxurious vehicle, she turned one last time. She saw Jackson, his face red with anger and embarrassment, and Sophia staring at her in disbelief. Isabella offered no wave, no word. She simply got into the car, and the door closed with a solid, muffled thud, separating her world from theirs. The luxury car pulled away, kicking up a cloud of dust that hit Jackson in the face. "Mr. Monroe! Mr. Monroe!" The reporters now swarmed Jackson like sharks smelling blood. "Who picked up Mrs. Vance? Whose car is that? Is there a third party involved? Is the reconciliation off?" "No comment!" Jackson barked, losing his composure. He pushed a microphone away and roughly grabbed Sophia's hand. "Let's go." Inside their own luxury car, which now felt cramped and hot, Jackson slammed his fist on the steering wheel. "Who the hell was that who picked her up?" he yelled. "That's Matthew Hayes, Jackson." Sophia's voice trembled with fear. "The expensive lawyer. Where did Isabella get the money to hire him? Her accounts are empty. We checked." "I don't know," Jackson growled, starting the engine abruptly. "But wherever she's gone, we have to find her. I need that signature today." Meanwhile, in the quiet, cool Rolls-Royce, Isabella leaned her head back against the soft leather seat. The scent of expensive leather and sandalwood air freshener replaced the stale smell of the prison. "Where to, ma'am?" Matthew asked politely from the front seat, looking at her in the rearview mirror. "To the safe house, Matthew," Isabella replied, her eyes closed. "I want to take a shower. I want to wash the last remnants of his touch off of me." The safe house turned out to be a penthouse suite at a 5-star hotel in Midtown Manhattan. This property was one of many hidden assets of Isabella's late father, not registered on the books of the company Jackson managed, but in a private trust that only Isabella could access upon turning 30 or under certain emergency conditions. Her wrongful imprisonment had activated the emergency clause. Isabella stood under the hot stream of water in the spacious marble bathroom. Steam filled the room. She scrubbed her skin with a rough loofah, as if trying to scrape off the layer of epidermis that had touched the prison air, that had been touched by Jackson. Finally, tears came, mixing with the water. It wasn't a cry of sadness, but of release. She cried for her 2 stolen years. She cried for her father, who couldn't see her free. She cried for the child she never carried but was accused of killing. After an hour, Isabella emerged. On the king-sized bed was a selection of new clothes prepared by Matthew's team in her size. They were no longer the feminine, pastel-toned dresses Jackson liked to make Isabella look like a submissive wife. The selection was bold, modern, and powerful. Structured blazers, high-waisted trousers, silk blouses in navy and black, the colors of power. Isabella chose a pristine white pantsuit with an elegant, asymmetrical cut. White, not as a symbol of purity, but as a blank canvas, or perhaps as the shroud for Jackson's career. As she buttoned the blazer, Matthew knocked and entered with a thick stack of documents. "Pardon the interruption, ma'am. The notary is waiting in the living room. We need your signature for the full transfer of power over your father's holding company." Isabella sat at the vanity, allowing a professional stylist, also arranged by Matthew, to cut her hair into a sharp bob that framed her determined features. "Read me the key points, Matthew." Isabella ordered, studying her new reflection in the mirror. Point 1. Matthew opened a blue folder. The power of attorney you granted to Jackson Monroe 3 years ago is hereby revoked. Point 2. Your status as the majority shareholder with 90% of the shares is activated. Point 3. All assets, both liquid and real estate, in the name of the company or affiliated persons, are frozen for a forensic audit. Proceed, Isabella said succinctly. There's one more thing, ma'am. Matthew hesitated for a moment. The bank has informed us that Mr. Monroe is requesting an emergency fund withdrawal of $1.2 million this afternoon, using a property certificate in the Hamptons as collateral. The certificate is in your name, but he holds the old power of attorney. Isabella swiveled her chair to face Matthew. Her face, now with light but firm makeup, looked formidable. Let him request it, Isabella said coldly. Let him feel victorious until the very last second. Then cut off his access, just as he's about to swallow the bait. Isabella stood, slipping on a pair of blood-red stiletto heels. The sound of her steps on the marble floor echoed like the strike of a judge's gavel. I'm done being the victim, Matthew. Now, show them who the real owner of all the luxury they enjoy is. While Isabella plotted her war strategy, Jackson was trying to bail water out of a sinking ship. At the headquarters of the Monroe Group, ironically located in a building owned by Isabella's father, Jackson paced back and forth in the boardroom. Across from him, 3 major investors looked nervous after seeing the morning news. Mr. Monroe, one of the investors, cleared his throat. The news this morning. Your wife refused to come home with you. Will this affect the ownership dispute over the assets? We hear the land for the Miami project is still in her name. Jackson laughed, a laugh too loud and forced. Oh, Mr. Garrotti, don't believe the cheap gossip. My wife Isabella, well, 2 years in prison has affected her mental health a bit. She was embarrassed to face the media, so she left discreetly in a car from the mental health clinic I hired. She needs time alone. The assets are secure. 100% secure, another investor pressed. 100%, Jackson lied smoothly. In fact, this very afternoon, I'll be signing for the release of fresh funds to accelerate our project. You have nothing to worry about. Isabella is a dutiful wife. As soon as she calms down, she'll sign anything I put in front of her. Sophia entered the room with a tray of coffee, once again playing her role as the efficient assistant. She smiled sweetly at the investors, but her eyes betrayed panic when they met Jackson's. When the investors left, placated with promises, Sophia slammed the tray on the table. Are you insane, Jackson? A mental health clinic? What if the reporters investigate? We don't even know where she is. Shut up, Sophia, Jackson barked. I'm buying time. The bank just called. The verification for the $1.2 million withdrawal is in process. As soon as that money is in our account, we pay the suppliers, secure our position, and then we find Isabella. If we have to, we'll hire some thugs to bring her home. Jackson's phone pinged. A notification from the bank. Verification process in its final stage. Jackson sighed in relief. See? The old power of attorney still works. Isabella is a fool. She didn't go straight to a lawyer when she got out. She must be crying in some corner. We have to celebrate tonight, Jackson, Sophia said, beginning to calm down. To relax our nerves and to show the public we're not worried. Let's have dinner at the summit room. Invite some high society friends. Good idea, Jackson nodded, adjusting his tie. His confidence was slowly returning. He felt he was still in control. He had always won against the weak Isabella. Why should this time be any different? They didn't realize that across town, a certified legal notice was being dispatched to that bank's headquarters, a notice on the letterhead of Matthew Hayes and Associates, attaching a newly signed legal document from just 5 minutes prior. The Summit Room restaurant was buzzing that night with New York's elite. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow. Soft jazz music floated through the air. Jackson and Sophia were seated at the best table in the center of the room. Sophia wore a new evening gown she had bought that afternoon on the company credit card, of course. They were surrounded by 2 other couples, business partners they were trying to court. So it's true Isabella has mental problems? Asked Mrs. Linares, a socialite with a penchant for gossip. Sophia put on a look of feigned sadness. Yes, my dear, it's such a shame. This morning, she didn't even recognize Jackson. She was hallucinating. The doctor says she needs intensive treatment. We're so worried. You two are saints, praised Mrs. Linares's husband, to continue caring for the woman who tried to kill your child. Jackson smiled humbly, raising his wineglass. Family is family, sir. I could never abandon Isabella. Let's toast to a better future. The glasses clinked. Jackson felt victorious. The narrative had been controlled. The money would arrive tomorrow morning. Life was getting back to normal. Excuse me, sir. A waiter approached with a credit card machine to charge for an extra bottle of Dom Perignon and the dinner bill. Jackson casually pulled out his corporate black card. The card was linked directly to the main company account with a limitless ceiling. Go ahead, Jackson said without looking at the bill. The waiter inserted the card, waited a moment, then frowned. He tried again. I'm sorry, sir, the card has been declined, the waiter whispered politely. The laughter at the table ceased. Jackson's face flushed. Impossible. Try it again. Your machine is probably broken. The waiter tried again. A long, painful beep sounded. Still declined, sir. The reason given is to contact issuer. Use mine. Sophia quickly pulled out her credit card, an additional card from the same account. The result was the same. Declined. Cold sweat began to trickle down Jackson's back. The guests started looking at each other uncomfortably. Maybe there's a problem with the bank system. Jackson tried to laugh, but it sounded hollow. One moment, I'll call finance. Jackson stepped away from the table, his hands trembling as he dialed the number of his company's CFO. Hello, Mr. Ramos. Why aren't the corporate cards working? Did you forget to pay the bill? Jackson barked in a whisper. On the other end of the line, Mr. Ramos's voice sounded panicked and breathless. Mr. Monroe, I was just about to call you. It's a disaster, sir. All the company accounts have been frozen. What do you mean, frozen? An order just came in from the SEC and banking regulators. There's a total lockdown instruction at the request of the new majority shareholder based on a clause of asset mismanagement. And, sir, that $1.2 million we requested this afternoon, the transaction was automatically canceled. Jackson's world tilted on its axis. New majority shareholder? Who? Mrs. Isabella Vance, sir, Mr. Ramos replied quietly. Her lawyer just sent over the articles of corporate restructuring. You were removed as CEO at 5 p.m. this afternoon. All of your access has been revoked. Jackson dropped the phone. He turned to the restaurant's large picture window. Across the street, a giant screen that normally showed cosmetic ads suddenly changed. It was a breaking news story. On the screen, Isabella's face, beautiful, firm, and powerful, was at a podium giving a press conference. The volume on the restaurant bar's TV was turned up by other patrons. I, Isabella Vance, as the rightful owner of the Vance Group, am today announcing a complete restructuring of the management. We have found evidence of massive embezzlement of funds over the last 2 years. As of today, I am assuming full control and will be pursuing legal action against the parties who have harmed this company. On the screen, Isabella looked directly into the camera, as if staring straight into the eyes of the paralyzed Jackson inside the luxurious restaurant, unable to pay his bill. Every eye in the restaurant was now on Jackson and Sophia. The whispers of admiration for the saintly family turned into looks of scorn and mockery. Jackson felt his knees buckle. It wasn't just a declined credit card. It was checkmate. And Isabella had just moved her first piece. The next morning, New York City woke up to an explosion not of a bomb, but of information that destroyed a reputation in seconds. In her penthouse, Isabella sipped a cup of chamomile tea while looking at her tablet. Matthew sat across from her, smiling with satisfaction. Number 1 trending topic on X, Instagram, and TikTok, Matthew reported. The hashtags number Justice for Isabella and number Monroe Reed Scandal have already reached 2 million mentions in an hour. Isabella swiped her finger across the screen. An anonymous account managed by Matthew's investigative team had released an explosive file. It wasn't mere rumor. It was a high-resolution scan of the original medical file from Mount Sinai Hospital, dated September 23, 2 days before the stairwell incident that sent Isabella to prison. The document clearly read, Patient, Sophia Reed. Diagnosis, incomplete spontaneous abortion due to consumption of hazardous chemical substances, dietary supplements. Procedure: Emergency D&C, September 23, 11:45 p.m. The document proved that when Sophia fell down the stairs on September 25th, her uterus was already empty. There was no baby for Isabella to have killed. Only the drama of a manipulative woman who used her own miscarriage to get rid of the rightful wife. Across town, in the lavish penthouse that once belonged to Isabella, the atmosphere was tense. Jackson smashed his phone against the wall, shattering the screen. His breathing was ragged. His bloodshot eyes glared at Sophia, who was huddled on the sofa, her face as pale as wax. "Explain it to me." Jackson's voice was low, trembling with an anger about to erupt. "Explain why that medical file says you miscarried 2 days before Isabella came to the office." It's fake, Jackson. Isabella forged it," Sophia tried to deny, but her voice broke. "Don't lie to me anymore," Jackson shouted, striding over and grabbing her by the shoulders. "I just called the hospital director. He's terrified. He says the file is authentic and was stolen by a nursing intern. So it's true. You had already miscarried because of your damned diet pills, and then you faked a fall to send Isabella to prison." Sophia broke down, crying hysterically. "I was scared, Jackson. You said back then that if I was pregnant, you would divorce Isabella, but then I lost the baby. I was afraid you would leave me if you knew the baby was gone. Then Isabella came in, furious. I saw an opportunity. I thought if Isabella went to prison, we could be happy forever." Jackson let go of her, stepping back as if he had touched something infectious. The betrayal left him speechless. For 2 years, he had lived convinced he was doing the right thing, seeking justice for his dead child. That conviction justified all his cruelty towards Isabella, but it turned out he was just a pawn in Sophia's twisted game. He had imprisoned his loyal wife for a liar. "Jackson, we have to deny it. Let's hire a lawyer. Let's pay off some influencers," Sophia begged, crawling to hug his legs. "With what money?" Jackson yelled in frustration. "My accounts are frozen, Sophia. My cards don't work. And now everyone knows you're a liar and I'm the idiot husband who imprisoned his innocent wife." The insistent ringing of the doorbell interrupted their argument. It wasn't a guest's ring, but a long, demanding buzz. Jackson looked at the security monitor. In front of the building's tall gate were 2 police cars, a moving truck, and, standing in the middle of it all, the figure that made his blood run cold. Isabella. The automatic gate opened, not because Jackson pushed the button, but because Isabella's team had overridden the security system. Isabella walked onto the grounds of her childhood home. The modern pre-war building with its majestic white pillars looked the same, but the atmosphere was different. The landscaping was too perfect. There were new, tacky sculptures in the garden, undoubtedly Sophia's taste. Behind Isabella walked Matthew, 4 police officers, and 2 court officers. The front door flew open. Jackson emerged, his face a mess, followed by a still sobbing Sophia. "What the hell is this, Isabella?" Jackson yelled, trying to maintain the last shreds of his authority in front of the police. "You can't just walk in here. This is still my home." Isabella stopped on the first step of the porch. She looked up at Jackson from a lower position, but somehow Jackson felt tiny. "You're home?" Isabella asked quietly. She turned to Matthew. "Matthew, please read property deed number 405 and the 2018 deed of gift." Matthew opened his leather-bound folder. "The property and building are registered in the name of Isabella Vance. Absolute donation from Mr. Richard Vance. No community property clause exists, as it was acquired before the marriage and holds the status of separate property. Based on this morning's temporary court order, the legal owner requests the immediate eviction of the property, as the current occupants have no legal right of residence." Jackson's face turned ashen. "But I'm your husband. This is our house." "You'll soon be my ex-husband," Isabella corrected him coldly. "And let me correct you again, Jackson. This is my house. You were just a guest who overstayed his welcome and started stealing the silverware." Isabella motioned to the officers. "Get their things. Only personal clothing and effects. All furniture, art, electronics, and jewelry purchased with company money stay here for the audit." "You can't do this!" Sophia screamed. She tried to lunge at Isabella, but a female police officer firmly restrained her. "I am the lady of this house." Isabella looked at Sophia with a gaze that could freeze blood. "You are no lady, Sophia. You are just a parasite that landed on the wrong host," Isabella said. "You have 30 minutes to pack, or I will have my men throw your bags onto the street." "Isabella." Jackson looked at her, searching for any trace of the sweet woman he once knew. The woman who always made his coffee in the morning, who massaged his feet when he was tired. That woman was dead. "Isabella." Jackson's voice softened, his last attempt at manipulation. "We can talk about this calmly inside, not in front of the police. Bella, I know I was wrong, but Sophia tricked me about the pregnancy. I'm a victim too, Bella." Isabella laughed, a short, empty sound. "A victim?" Isabella took a step forward, bringing her face close to Jackson's. "You are not a victim, Jackson. You are a greedy man who chose to believe his mistress over the wife who stood by you for 10 years. You don't regret that Sophia lied. You regret that you got caught." She turned, giving them her back. "You have 25 minutes left. For every minute you are late, one of your bags will be burned." Jackson and Sophia had no choice. Under the supervision of the police, they ran to their room, panickedly stuffing clothes into suitcases. Jackson tried to grab his Rolex from a drawer, but an officer stopped him. "Sorry, sir. That's listed as a company asset from last year. It's being confiscated." Half an hour later, Jackson and Sophia stood on the sidewalk outside the gate. 2 large suitcases and several carry-on bags lay at their feet. The gate slowly closed in front of them. Neighbors began to come out to witness the drama, whispering. Jackson Monroe, the successful CEO, was now on the street like a high-class homeless man. From the master bedroom window on the 2nd floor, Isabella watched them. She didn't feel happy. She just felt clean. The house could finally breathe again. The next day, the battlefield moved to the Vance Tower, a 40-story skyscraper on Park Avenue. At 9 a.m., the main boardroom on the top floor was filled with the board of directors and minority shareholders. The atmosphere was tense. The coffee served remained untouched. The double doors opened. Isabella Vance entered, flanked by Matthew and Eleanor Shaw, who was now on parole and had joined as Isabella's lead legal counsel. Isabella wore a jet black pantsuit. Her bob was perfectly styled. She walked to the chair at the head of the table, the chair Jackson had occupied for 2 years. She sat, placing her hands on the marble tabletop. "Good morning," she greeted. Her voice was calm but commanded the room. "Apologies for the chaos of the last 2 days. We are here to take out the trash." Suddenly, the boardroom door was forced open. Jackson burst in, dodging security guards who tried to stop him. He was still wearing the wrinkled suit from the day before. "I am still the rightful CEO of this company," Jackson yelled breathlessly. "This meeting is not valid without my presence. I built this company for the last 2 years while she was in prison." "Built?" Isabella raised an eyebrow. She pressed a button on the projector remote. A graph appeared on the giant screen. A red line plummeted downwards. "During your 2 years of leadership, Jackson," Isabella began her presentation as if Jackson were an incompetent intern. "Net profits fell by 40%. Short-term debt increased by 200%. And most interestingly," Isabella pressed another button. A list of suspicious transactions appeared. There was a fund flow of $1 million to a company called V.I. Interiors, a shell company owned by one Sophia Reed. What was this for? "Interior Consulting Services," Isabella read in a mocking tone. "What interior design costs $1 million? The redecoration of hell?" The shareholders murmured uneasily. Jackson's face went pale. He knew those funds. It was the money he had used to buy Sophia an apartment and a luxury car without it being traced as a personal asset. It was a business diversification strategy. Jackson tried to excuse himself, but his voice was weak. "It's embezzlement, Jackson," Eleanor cut him off sharply. "Section 18 of the U.S. Code. And since you did it in the course of your duties, the penalty is enhanced." Isabella stood up. "As the holder of 90% of the voting shares, I exercise my right. The only item on today's agenda is the removal of Jackson Monroe as CEO with dishonorable discharge and the filing of a lawsuit for damages for all company losses. "I agree," exclaimed one of the oldest board members, who had long hated Jackson's arrogant leadership style. "I agree," the others chorused. Jackson stood frozen in the middle of the room. He looked around for an ally, but the people who once flattered him, who laughed with him on the golf course, now looked away. In the world of business, there are no eternal friends, only interests. And Jackson was no longer of any value. "Security," Isabella called calmly. "Please escort Mr. Monroe out and ensure he takes nothing but the remnants of his dignity if he has any left." 2 burly security guards grabbed Jackson's arms. He resisted weakly, his eyes fixed on Isabella. "You're cruel, Bella," Jackson whispered. "I learned from the best," Isabella replied without blinking. The door closed. Jackson was cast out of his own kingdom. Inside, Isabella sat down again. "All right, gentlemen, let's talk about how we're going to save this ship," Isabella said, opening a new chapter for her father's company. Room 204 of the Liberty View Motel was small. It smelled of stale cigarettes, and the air conditioner rattled like an old tractor. Jackson sat on the edge of the lumpy bed, staring at the peeling wall. On the floor, his luxury suitcases filled with designer clothes were piled up, looking ridiculous in the dingy room. 3 days had passed since they were kicked out. The credit cards didn't work. The cash Jackson had left in his wallet was barely $300 a pittance for someone who used to spend that on a single dinner. His Mercedes had been repossessed by the finance company the previous evening. It turned out Jackson was 3 months behind on payments. The money had been diverted to cover Sophia's lifestyle. "It's so hot in here, I can't sleep," Sophia complained. She had just come out of the bathroom, where the faucet dripped incessantly. "Stop complaining," Jackson muttered without turning. "Stop complaining?" Sophia exploded. She threw a wet towel at Jackson's face. "This is all your fault. You said you were a business genius. You said Isabella's assets were under your control. And what happened? You're just a puppet. Without Isabella's signature, you have nothing." Jackson swatted the towel away, stood up, and pushed Sophia against the cheap wooden wardrobe. "My fault!" he yelled, his eyes bloodshot. "Do you own a mirror? This whole thing fell apart because of your lie, Sophia. If you hadn't faked the fall, if you hadn't put on that dirty show, Isabella wouldn't have gone to prison. We probably would have divorced amicably. I would have gotten part of the marital assets, and we'd still be rich. But no, you got greedy. You wanted to see her destroyed. And now look who's destroyed." "I did it for us," Sophia screamed back through tears. "I love you, you idiot." "Love?" Jackson laughed bitterly. "You loved my credit card. You loved the status of being Mrs. Monroe. Now that I have nothing, do you still love me?" Sophia fell silent. Her eyes darted around nervously, avoiding Jackson's gaze. The painful silence filled the room. Sophia's unsaid answer was more hurtful than a slap. "I knew it," he hissed, sitting back down and burying his face in his hands. "Jackson." Sophia's voice changed, becoming calculating. "We can sell my jewelry, my bags, they're still worth something. We can run away, to Mexico or Canada. Our passports are flagged, Sophia," Jackson said wearily. "A friend in law enforcement told me. Isabella moved fast. We're under surveillance, waiting for a summons." Sophia slumped to the floor, her face pale. The image of prison, the place she used to laugh about when visiting Isabella, now haunted her. She imagined a cramped cell, stale food, and a cold floor. "I don't want to go to jail, Jackson," she sobbed. "Do something. Call Isabella. Beg her for forgiveness. She loved you. She was a fool in love. There must be a way." "She's not a fool anymore," Jackson replied, staring blankly out the barred window. "She's a monster we created." The sound of a police siren wailed in the distance. To both of them, it sounded like an approaching funeral bell. The law offices of Matthew Hayes and Associates were a hive of activity. Stacks of documents piled up on the conference table. Isabella signed the last page of a 2-inch thick file. "There," she said, as Matthew closed the red binder. "The petition for a writ of habeas corpus to the Supreme Court. The new evidence, the smoking gun, is airtight," Eleanor added, sipping her coffee. "The original medical file, the testimony from the nurse who has finally decided to talk for fear of being implicated, and the missing security camera footage. a copy of which was kept by the former head of security Jackson fired. Yes, Isabella had located the security chief. It turned out Jackson had fired him without severance a week after the incident. Resentful, the man kept a copy of the hard drive as a life insurance policy. The footage clearly showed Isabella and Sophia were 6 feet apart. Sophia glanced at the camera, then deliberately let herself fall with the technique of an amateur stuntwoman. With this evidence, Matthew continued, your conviction will be vacated. The state will have to restore your good name, and history will record that you were never guilty. That's for the past, Isabella said calmly. Now for the future. Matthew handed her a second black folder. Police report number LPB 098122025. Matthew Reed. Defendants, Jackson Monroe and Sophia Reed. Charges filed. Perjury, under 18 U.S.C. Section 1621. False statements, under 18 U.S.C. Section 1001. Wire fraud, mail fraud, and money laundering. The combined sentence? Isabella asked. For Jackson, with embezzlement and money laundering, it could be up to 15 years, Eleanor replied. For Sophia, as the mastermind of the plot that sent an innocent person to prison, the judges will be very harsh, maybe 7 to 9 years. Isabella looked at her signature on the official paper. The black ink was still fresh. She had once signed her marriage license with a hand trembling with happiness. Now, she signed the death warrant for her ex-husband's life with a steady hand. File it, Isabella ordered. Now, Matthew asked. Now, Isabella replied. I want them to receive it while they're eating instant noodles in that disgusting motel. I want them to choke on reality. Matthew nodded and handed the file to his assistant to take to the police station. Isabella walked to the office window overlooking the Manhattan skyline. The sky was overcast, but to her, it seemed clear. Justice is slow, Isabella murmured. Eleanor came to stand beside her, putting an arm around her student and client's shoulders. It's slow, kid, but it has a very cruel sense of humor. When it arrives, it hits where it hurts the most. You're right, Eleanor. Isabella smiled faintly. They took 2 years from me. I'll take the rest of their lives from them. Isabella's phone vibrated. A text from an unknown number. Isabella, help me. Jackson hit me. I want to be a protected witness. I have more evidence about the bribe Jackson paid to the judge. Meet me. Sophia. Isabella showed the message to Eleanor and Matthew. Just as you suspected, Eleanor, Isabella said coolly. The rats start eating each other when the ship sinks. What are you going to reply? Eleanor asked. Isabella typed a short response and turned off her phone. Isabella's reply, save your story for the police, I don't care. A torrential rain fell on New York that afternoon, as if the sky were crying or perhaps washing away the city's sins. In the lobby of the Vance Tower, the atmosphere was silent despite it being closing time. Employees who normally rushed out now walked slowly, their gazes fixed on a point in the middle of the grand marble lobby. There, kneeling, was a man they once feared and respected. Jackson Monroe, his shirt untucked and hair disheveled, was on his knees on the floor. He didn't care about the whispers of the employees he once yelled at, nor the security guards who watched him with a mixture of pity and disgust. His gaze was fixed only on the VIP elevator door, which had just opened. Isabella stepped out. The sound of her stiletto heels echoed. Click, clack, click, rhythmic as the ticking of a death clock. She wore a black trench coat, elegant and untouchable. Beside her, Matthew was alert, but Isabella held up a hand, signaling him to stay back. Jackson crawled on his knees towards her. Isabella. Jackson's voice was hoarse, broken by a suppressed sob. Isabella, help me. They're looking for me. The police are outside. Isabella stopped 6 feet from Jackson. She looked down at her ex-husband, not with anger, but with the gaze of a scientist observing a dying insect. Get up, Jackson, Isabella said in a flat voice. You're in the way. Forgive me, Bella. I was wrong. I was a fool. Jackson prostrated himself, his forehead touching the cold marble. That woman bewitched me. Sophia planned everything. She forced me to bribe the judge. She faked the evidence. I still love you, Isabella. Remember our 10 years of marriage. Remember when we started with nothing. Isabella chuckled softly, a cold, piercing laugh. We started with nothing, she repeated. Correction, Jackson. I started with nothing. You were just the handsome passenger. And as for love, you don't love me. You miss my credit card. You miss the power of my signature. You miss the security I gave you. No, I swear to God. Don't bring God into this. Isabella cut him off sharply. She crouched slightly so her eyes were level with Jackson's red-rimmed ones. 2 years ago, when I knelt at your feet, begging you to believe me when I told you I didn't push Sophia, what did you do? You pushed me away. You practically spit in my face and let the police drag me away. Jackson was silent, his body trembling violently. The memory hit him. Now, Isabella whispered, you're feeling 1,000th of my desperation back then. Enjoy it. It's my farewell gift. Isabella straightened up and turned to the head of security. Mr. Garcia, please clean up this mess and allow the police officers outside to enter. Isabella, no! Isabella! Jackson tried to grab her leg, but 2 guards held him firmly. From the lobby's revolving door, 4 uniformed police officers entered, handcuffs in hand. Jackson Monroe, an officer said firmly, you are under arrest for suspicion of money laundering, embezzlement, and perjury. Click! The sound of the handcuffs closing. Isabella didn't turn back. She walked to her waiting car, leaving Jackson behind as he was dragged out, accompanied by the flashes of reporters' cameras waiting at the door. The interrogation room at the police precinct was cold and smelled of stale coffee. On one side of the metal table, Sophia Reed sat with trembling hands, clutching a plastic cup. Her usually radiant face was now dull, her eyes swollen. Across from her, a seasoned detective stared at her while Matthew, present as the plaintiff's attorney, watched from behind a one-way mirror in the adjacent room. Miss Reed, the detective said, the medical evidence is conclusive. You faked a pregnancy and a miscarriage to send Mrs. Vance to prison. The penalty is 7 years, but you could get a reduction if you cooperate in uncovering a larger case. Sophia swallowed hard. She knew this was her only way out. Jackson was finished. There was no point in being loyal to a sinking ship. What guarantee do I have, detective? She asked quietly. We will propose you as a cooperating witness to the district attorney. Your sentence will be reduced, the detective replied. We need proof of Jackson's involvement in bribing the judge at the trial 2 years ago. Sophia took a deep breath and rummaged through her purse, which had been confiscated but she was allowed to access. She pulled out a small pink USB drive. Jackson thinks he's so smart, Sophia said, her voice turning bitter and vengeful. He deleted all the chats and emails, but he forgot something. I handled the transfers. I always made backups of everything as insurance for my future. The detective took the drive and plugged it into a laptop. The screen displayed a series of cryptocurrency transfers and recordings of phone conversations. Jackson's voice. Recording. Listen, the judge needs another $100,000 to make sure the sentence is the maximum. Take it from the company's marketing funds. Isabella has to be in prison for at least 2 years to give me time to transfer the Miami properties. Sophia's voice. Recording. But that's risky, honey. Jackson's voice. Just do it. Or do you want us to end up poor? As soon as she's in that cell, we'll be king and queen. Behind the mirror, Isabella, who had just entered, stood frozen. She suspected Jackson was evil, but hearing her ex-husband directly plot her destruction with such coldness was still painful. Bastard! Matthew hissed beside her. In the interrogation room, Sophia continued her betrayal. And that's not all, detective, Sophia added, her eyes glinting with malice. Jackson also ordered someone to cut the brakes on Isabella's old lawyer's car so he couldn't attend the first appeal hearing. I have the chats with the thug he hired. The detective was stunned. The case was expanding from domestic fraud to organized crime and attempted murder. That's enough, the detective said, closing the laptop. This is enough to put Jackson in prison for life. Sophia smiled in relief, thinking she had saved herself. Thank you for your cooperation, Miss Reed, the detective said coldly. Your status is now officially that of a detainee and defendant. We will submit your request for cooperation, but remember, you are still the mastermind of the fake miscarriage. Don't expect to walk free. Sophia's smile vanished. But I helped. Helping to uncover another crime doesn't erase your own, the detective stated. Take her to the holding cells. As Sophia was being led out, she passed Jackson, who was being led into the next room. Their eyes met. There was no love, only the pure hatred of two predators devouring each other. 3 months later, in the New York State Supreme Court, the courtroom was packed. The case had become the trial of the year. The public, outraged by the injustice Isabella had suffered, filled the area around the courthouse with signs of support. Isabella sat in the front row. She looked serene, dressed entirely in white. Beside her, Eleanor squeezed her hand tightly. The presiding judge, not the same one as before, the previous one had been disbarred and was now also a defendant, banged his gavel to begin the reading of the verdict. Jackson and Sophia sat in the dock, separated by 2 police officers. Jackson looked gaunt, his hair had turned gray, his eyes were sunken. Sophia kept her head down, crying silently. "This court is now in session." The judge's voice boomed, Isabella's heart pounded. The moment of truth. The court finds the defendant, Jackson Monroe, guilty of the charges of bribery, money laundering, and fraud causing harm to third parties. The judge took a deep breath and sentences the defendant to a term of 15 years in prison and a fine of $3 million, with a subsidiary personal liability of 1 year in prison in case of non-payment. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Jackson slumped in his chair as if his spine had been removed. 15 years. He would get out at 50. With no money, no family, an old ex-con. And the court finds the defendant, Sophia Reed, the judge continued. Sophia looked up, hoping her cooperating status would help her, guilty of the charges of perjury and false accusation, which resulted in the deprivation of liberty of a person. Although the defendant has acted as a cooperating witness, considering her active role and malicious intent as the initiator of the deception, the court sentences the defendant to a term of 6 years in prison. Sophia screamed hysterically, "No, it's not fair! It was Jackson who made me. 6 years!" "Remove her from the court," the judge ordered. Jackson didn't scream. He just turned to find Isabella in the crowd. Isabella didn't look away. She met his gaze directly and gave a slow, deliberate nod, a period at the end of a sentence. As Jackson was led away through a side door, he saw Isabella standing, surrounded by the flashes of cameras, smiling. A real smile for the first time in 3 years. Jackson realized it was the last time he would see the light of day as a free man. 1 year later, Isabella stood on a large plot of land on the outskirts of New York. Behind her, a new, pleasant, modern building had just been completed. A sign at the entrance read, "The Phoenix Foundation, Legal Aid and Empowerment Center for Women." "It's beautiful, ma'am," said Matthew, who stood beside her. Matthew was no longer just her lawyer, but also the foundation's chief operating officer. "This is just the beginning, Matthew," Isabella replied, smiling. "This building will be a home for voiceless women, women like me, silenced by the system and their partners." Isabella had sold the Vance Group. She wanted nothing to do with a real estate business filled with bad memories of Jackson. With the money from the sale, plus the assets from Jackson that the state returned to her as compensation, she built the foundation and invested in green technologies, a quieter sector. The name Isabella Vance was now known as that of a philanthropist and activist, not as Jackson's ex-wife or a victim. She had rewritten her own identity. That afternoon, Isabella went to the cemetery. She placed a bouquet of lilies on her father's grave. "Dad," Isabella whispered, stroking the headstone, "it's all over. Your fortune is back and being used for good. Our name is clean." A gentle breeze blew, rustling the leaves of the trees. Isabella felt peace. The vengeance that once burned in her chest had been extinguished, replaced by a vast, serene relief. She no longer lived to destroy Jackson. She lived for herself. Her phone buzzed. A calendar reminder. Monthly visit. Isabella smiled wryly. There was one last thing she had to do to close the circle perfectly. Green Haven Correctional Facility. The atmosphere in the visiting room was noisy, but to Isabella, it felt silent. She sat in a cold metal chair, separated by thick glass and bars. A familiar position, but now the roles were reversed. The door opposite opened. Jackson entered, escorted by a guard. He looked pathetic. He had only been in prison for a year, but he looked 10 years older. His head was shaved due to lice. His face was rough and sallow, with a scar on his temple, probably from a fight. His aura of arrogance was gone, replaced by the pleading look of a beaten dog. Jackson sat down. He looked at Isabella with teary eyes, as if seeing a savior angel. He picked up the intercom receiver with trembling hands. Isabella calmly lifted hers. "Isabella," Jackson's voice sounded distorted in her ear. "Thank you for coming. I knew you would. You still care about me, right?" Isabella remained silent, letting Jackson talk. "This is hell, Bella," Jackson began to cry. "They beat me. The food is garbage. I can't take it anymore, Bella. Please, help me. File an appeal. You have connections now. Or at least send me money. My commissary account is at 0. I'm starving." Isabella looked at this man, the man she once adored, the man who threw her into a place just like this without a second thought. "I didn't come here to save you, Jackson." Isabella's voice was clear and calm. "Then why?" Jackson was stunned. Isabella took a brown envelope from her purse and held it up to the glass. "This is a copy of our finalized divorce decree and the settlement of marital assets. The court has decided that since you were the cause of the divorce and committed a crime against your spouse, you receive not a single cent." Jackson's face fell. The hope of money vanished. "And one more thing," Isabella continued. "I came to return this." Isabella pulled out the white gold wedding band Jackson had given her, the ring she had kept in the deepest drawer. "The guard will give it to you later," she said. "Sell it. Maybe it will get you enough for a month's worth of cigarettes and ramen in the commissary." "Isabella, don't do this," Jackson sobbed. "I'm your husband." "I'm sorry." Isabella stood up, adjusting her blazer. "You used to visit me every month, waiting for me to break and surrender," Isabella said, looking directly into Jackson's eyes through the glass. "Today, I came to make sure you see that I am whole, happy, and that I have won." "Isabella, wait! When will you come back?" Jackson yelled desperately as Isabella began to turn away. "Don't leave me alone, Isabella." Isabella paused for a moment and turned slightly. "There will be no more visits, Jackson. This is the last one. Enjoy the rest of your life in the box you built for yourself." Isabella hung up the phone. The connection went dead. Behind the glass, Jackson was screaming without a sound, pounding on the glass, begging, crying. But Isabella was already gone. The heavy iron door opened, letting the bright sunlight greet her. She took a deep breath, inhaling the true air of freedom. No burdens, no past. Isabella walked to her car, where Matthew was waiting with a smile. She got in, and the vehicle slowly pulled away, leaving the grim prison building further and further behind, until it became a tiny dot that finally disappeared in the rearview mirror. The flower had fully bloomed, and the iron bars had only been the fertilizer that made it stronger.